Velathos had seen 47 species walk through the doors of the conclave sphere. He had denied 43 of them. He sat in his chair at the high table, a chair carved from the bones of a dead moon, which sounded dramatic but was really just a material that didn't scratch, and he watched the doors open for species number 48. The humans walked in. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman. The woman walked in front. She wore a dark blue suit that someone had clearly ironed very carefully, and she carried a folder of papers that she held a little too tightly. Her name was Ambassador Dara Osei, and she had spent 4 years learning the 6 official languages of the conclave. She mispronounced all of them. Not badly. Just the way someone mispronounces a word they've only ever read and never heard spoken aloud. Like she'd studied from books in a small room somewhere and practiced in front of a mirror and gotten very close. Velathos noted this in his log. "They try hard," he wrote. "It is almost moving." Dara Osei stood before the high table and introduced herself in Keth first, which was correct. The Keth were the senior species in the chamber, and, acknowledging that, was a sign of cultural awareness. Most species didn't bother. Velathos's 6 eyes narrowed slightly with something that, in a Keth, passed for mild approval. Then she began her presentation. She had prepared it well. Humanity's case for conclave membership was thorough. She talked about their population 4 trillion, spread across 31 worlds. She talked about their resource output significant, growing. She talked about the relay stations they had built along the outer corridors, the trade lanes they had mapped, the diseases they had contained in 2 border systems that would have spread into conclave territory if humanity hadn't caught them first. She was 11 minutes into her presentation when Delegate Korath of the Sketh interrupted her. "Has the human delegation submitted Form 7, Gamma in triplicate?" Korath asked. Dara stopped. "I believe we submitted Form 7, Gamma. Yes. In triplicate. We submitted 3 copies. Physical or digital? A pausa. Digital. Form 7. Gamma requires 1 physical copy." Dara looked at her folder, then at Korath, then back at her folder. "We can provide a physical copy," she said. "The physical copy must accompany the original submission." "I understand, we can." The window for original submission closed 6 days ago. Dara Osei stood very still for a moment. The 2 men behind her exchanged a look. Then she smiled. It was a real smile. Velathos had seen enough fake smiles to know the difference. This one reached her eyes, which meant it was either genuine warmth or a very, very good performance. "Of course," she said, "we'll resubmit." She thanked the conclave for their time. She meant it. Velathos watched her leave and wrote one more line in his log. "They will be back." He was right. They came back 4 months later with the physical copy of Form 7, Gamma, and 6 other forms that the conclave secretariat had identified as missing from the original application. They had also somehow translated all the documents into Sketh administrative script, which was a language that took most species 3 years to learn, and humanity had apparently managed in 4 months. Delegate Korath reviewed the Sketh script. It was flawless. He said nothing about this and instead asked about Form 1-2, Delta. Dara Osei submitted Form 1-2, Delta, 2 weeks later. Then Form 1-2, Delta required a supporting annex. Then the supporting annex needed certification from the Bureau of Galactic Census, which required humanity to submit a population audit. The population audit took 8 months, because the Bureau of Galactic Census was run by the Vrathine, who were meticulous, to the point of spiritual dedication, and audited every single human world, individually. Humanity cooperated fully with the audit. The Bureau of Galactic Census certified the population figures. The supporting annex was completed. Velathos received the completed application package 14 months after Dara Osei had first walked through those doors. He set it on his desk and looked at it for a while. It was a very large package. Humans, he had noticed, were thorough. He sent it to the review committee. The review committee met once a year, in the 3rd month of the conclave calendar. They had already met for that year. Humanity's application would be reviewed at the next meeting. In 11 months, Velathos sent the notification to the human embassy on the lower ring of the station. He did not feel good about sending it. He did not feel bad about it either. It was procedure. He had followed it for 220 years. Procedure did not care about feelings. He did note, in his private log, that the application was the most thorough he had ever received. He wrote, If procedure did not exist, they would be approved. Then he went to his next meeting. Ose did not go home. This was the thing that Velathos found he kept thinking about in the months that followed. Most ambassadors, when their applications were delayed, went home. They came back for the next submission window. They maintained a small office, a skeleton staff. The work was slow and mostly clerical. There was no reason to stay. Ose stayed. She moved into the human embassy on the lower ring, a modest set of rooms that humanity rented at a rate that Velathos suspected was slightly inflated by the station management, though he had no proof of this, and she worked. Every day. She attended every open session of the conclave, even the ones that had nothing to do with humanity. She learned the names of every delegate's staff members. She remembered them. She asked about their families, their homeworlds, the little things. She was not doing this to manipulate anyone. Velathos watched her carefully and decided this. She was doing it because she was the kind of person who found other beings interesting. He found this quietly remarkable. He also found it quietly heartbreaking, in a way he did not examine too closely. The review committee met. Humanity's application was tabled for further study. The study would take between 1 and 3 years, depending on the committee's schedule. Velathos delivered this news himself. He went to the human embassy. He sat across from Ose at a small table with 2 cups of something she called coffee, which smelled like burned wood and tasted, he imagined, like a decision you regret. He told her. She nodded. She poured him more coffee. She asked if he wanted to know what humans had discovered about the enzyme plague developing in the Jeth corridor, because her scientists had been studying it for 6 months and they thought they had something useful. Velathos sat back and looked at her. He said, "That plague is in Sketh territory." She said, "Yes." He said, "Delegate Korath will not thank you for this." She said, "The people in the Jeth corridor will." He drank the coffee. It tasted exactly like he'd imagined. He accepted the report on the enzyme plague and passed it to the relevant committee, without indicating where it had come from. The committee used the human research to develop a containment protocol. The plague did not spread. Nobody thanked humanity. Velathos wrote in his log that night, "They give anyway. I cannot decide if this is wisdom or damage." The review committee finished its study in 2 years. Humanity's application required additional documentation. Specifically, they needed certified territorial maps of all human-occupied space, co-signed by neighboring species within the relevant corridors. This was Form 3.1, Theta. It was a relatively new requirement, added to the membership code 8 years prior. Velathos checked the date it was added. It was added 3 months after humanity's original application. He sat with this information for a while. Then he put it in his private log in a folder he labeled, "Things I Notice but Cannot Change," and sent the Form 3.1 Theta requirement to the human embassy. Ose sent back a reply within the hour. It said, "Understood. We'll get started." Getting Form 3.1 Theta signed required negotiating with 7 different species, 3 of whom had active territorial disputes with each other and 2 of whom had not spoken diplomatically in 40 years. It required 11 months of work and 2 near breakdowns in the border talks that humanity quietly helped repair, because the humans apparently could not help themselves. All 7 signatures were obtained. Form 3.1 Theta was submitted. The conclave scheduled a vote on humanity's membership application. The day of the vote, the chamber was full. This was unusual. Most membership votes were procedural. Delegates attended by proxy or not at all. But humanity had been applying for 11 years now, and there was something about this vote that had drawn people in. Maybe curiosity, maybe the fact that Ose's face, which had become something of a fixture on the station, was going to be in the room. She sat in the observer gallery with her staff. She had dressed carefully. The same dark blue suit, pressed perfectly. She had a small pin on her lapel. Velathos had looked it up. That was the flag of her home country on Earth, a small yellow star on a green field. The vote proceeded. The delegates voted by order of seniority. Velathos voted last, as senior delegate. He looked at Ose once before he cast his vote. She was watching the board where the results were appearing, one by one. Her hands were in her lap. She was very still. 9 against, 2 abstain, 0 in favor. Velathos had voted to abstain. He was aware, in the moment he did it, that this was the most cowardly thing he had done in 220 years of diplomatic service. He had the votes of 2 junior Keth delegates in his pocket. He could have moved them. He had chosen not to because the political cost within his own government was too high. He told himself this was pragmatism. He did not believe himself. The chamber cleared quickly. People had other things to do. The vote was recorded. The result was sent to the Human Embassy in a formal notification letter that used the phrase "after careful consideration," without any visible shame. Velathos walked through the corridor outside the chamber and found Dara Ose standing against the wall. Not crying, not angry, just standing, looking at the wall. He stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. He had a meeting in 11 minutes. He asked if she was well. She looked at him. Something passed across her face, something that was not quite sadness and not quite anything else he had a word for. Then it was gone, and she was just Dara Ose again, composed and warm. "Of course," she said. A pause. "We're used to it." Not bitter, not performed. The way someone states a fact about weather. Velathos stood there for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he went to his meeting. He thought about those 3 words for a very long time afterward. "We're used to it." Dara Ose served as ambassador for 9 more years before she retired and was replaced by Ambassador Leon Chukwu, who was younger and perhaps slightly less patient, though he hid it better than most. Leon Chukwu served for 12 years. Then came Ambassador Priya Nair. Then came Ambassador Rafi El-Sayed. Each one learned the conclave languages. Each one submitted the correct forms. Each one sat in the observer gallery during votes and watched the board and kept their hands in their laps and thanked the conclave for their time. The applications were submitted, tabled, revised, resubmitted, studied, delayed. New requirements were added to the membership code. Humanity met them. During this time, 67 years, 4 ambassadors, 6 different conclave administrations, the humans built things. They extended trade lanes. They upgraded relay stations. They quietly helped contain 2 more disease outbreaks in territories that were not theirs. They published research. They traded fairly. They paid their station fees on time. They filed everything in the correct format. A new species applied for conclave membership, the Vreth. Small, 4-armed, from the second arm of the galaxy. They applied on a Tuesday and were approved on a Thursday, 8 weeks and 2 days from first contact. They had brought the right gifts. Humanity's application, filed 67 years ago, revised 43 times, currently in its 6th review cycle, remained under consideration. Velathos, now the oldest living Keth diplomat, watched the Vreth delegation take their seat at the conclave table. He watched from the upper gallery because his joints no longer handled the stairs well. He thought about a woman in a dark blue suit, a yellow star on a green field. We're used to it. He thought about what it meant that a species could say those words and mean them, not as defeat, just as a statement of fact. We have experienced this before. We will continue. We are still here. He thought about what kind of species could absorb 67 years of polite rejection and still show up, still press the suit, still learn the languages, still mean it when they said thank you. He pulled up the human membership file on his personal screen. 4,200 pages. The longest file in conclave history, by a significant margin. He read the cover page of the original application, filed 67 years ago by Ambassador Dara Ose. It said, "The people of Earth and its territories request, with respect and good faith, the opportunity to contribute to the safety and prosperity of the galactic community." Just that. No threats, no posturing, no list of what they'd do if refused. Just a request, in good faith. Velathos sat in the upper gallery long after everyone else had left. He thought, "We made a mistake." He thought, "I made a mistake." He thought, for the first time in 220 years of procedural certainty, something is going to change. He didn't know what. He didn't know when. He just knew, with the instinct of a very old creature, who had watched many things go wrong in exactly this way, that a species patient enough to endure 67 years of this was not going to endure it forever. Patience was not the same as acceptance. He had confused the two. He suspected the galaxy had made the same mistake. He closed the file, went home, slept poorly, dreamed of a woman standing against a wall, looking at nothing, completely still, and that stillness being somehow the loudest thing he had ever not heard. He woke up and went to work. He had 43 review files waiting. He processed them all correctly and efficiently. He was, after all, a professional. But the dream stayed with him. It stayed with him for a very long time. The Iridian corridor smelled like burned metal and old starlight. This was not a real smell. Commander Yusuf Adebayo Marsh knew this. Space did not smell like anything. But every time he stood on the bridge of the UES threshold and looked out at the corridor, at the relay stations blinking softly in the dark, at the trade lanes marked with human-built beacons, at the long, clean stretch of mapped space that his species had charted, station by station, over 40 years, he thought he smelled something. Something old. Something that had cost a great deal. He had been patrolling this corridor for 6 years. He knew every beacon. He had repaired 3 of them personally, floating in a suit in the nothing, with a wrench and a stubbornness his mother called a personality defect. The corridor did not belong to humanity. It never had. Technically, the legal status of the Iridian corridor was a matter that humanity had raised with the Conclave 14 times in 30 years, and had received 14 different versions of the same answer, which was, the matter is under consideration. Under consideration meant it didn't belong to anyone, which in practice meant it belonged to whoever was biggest. The Sketh were bigger. The Sketh vessel came out of jump at 0340 station time. Yusuf was asleep. His second officer, Lieutenant Commander Preet Kaur, woke him with a tap on his quarters door and the specific tone of voice that meant, not an emergency, but also come now. He came. The Sketh ship was an administrative vessel, not military. Gray and wide, shaped like something that had been designed by committee, which it probably had. It was called the Osverathu, and it had pulled up alongside the threshold with all the casual authority of a landlord visiting a tenant. A communication came through within minutes. A Sketh administrator appeared on screen. Gray-skinned, wearing the orange sash of the Commerce Bureau. She spoke in Conclave Standard, which was the polite way of saying she could speak Sketh if Yusuf wanted to struggle. He spoke Conclave Standard. She explained, with great efficiency and zero warmth, that the Iridian Corridor Maintenance and Operations Levy enacted under Conclave Maritime Code Section 7, Paragraph 14, 3 years prior required all vessels operating in the corridor to pay a usage fee per transit. The threshold had made 41 transits this year. The accumulated fee was substantial. Yusuf said, "We have a challenge pending with the Conclave on that levy." The administrator said, "Yes, the challenge is under review. It's been under review for 9 years. Correct." A pause. "The levy still applies during the review period," she said. "I understand that," Yusuf said. "I'm telling you we don't have authorization to pay uncontested fees while a legal challenge is in progress. That's our legal counsel's guidance. Then your vessel is in violation." Another pause. Yusuf looked at Preet. Preet looked at the ceiling, which was her way of saying, "I have no good ideas." "We'll submit a payment deferral request," Yusuf said, "through the proper channels." "Of course," the administrator said. "The proper channels will process your request." She ended the communication. The boarding team arrived 2 hours later. They came in a small transport, 4 Sketh auditors in Commerce Bureau uniforms, carrying scanning equipment and data pads. They had the legal right to board. Conclave Maritime Code gave commercial compliance officers broad boarding authority in contested transit zones. Yusuf let them on. He stood in the corridor outside the cargo bay and watched them work. They were thorough. They cataloged everything. They scanned serial numbers off equipment and cross-referenced them against trade manifests. They were looking for fee violations, import irregularities, anything that would add to the liability. It took 4 hours. 40 minutes into the process, one of the auditors moved past Petty Officer Lena Vasquez, who was standing near the cargo bay door doing her job, which was standing there and looking calm. The auditor wanted to get by. There was space. Not much, but enough. He didn't ask her to move. He put his hand on her arm and moved her. Not hard, not violent. The way you move a chair that's slightly in the way. A practical gesture. Efficient. Lena didn't react. She let herself be moved. She stepped aside. She looked at the auditor's hand on her arm, then at the wall in front of her, then at nothing. Yusuf saw it. He didn't say anything. He filed it. The way you file a splinter, small thing, not urgent, but you know it's there. The auditors left with their data. The threshold received a formal notice of levy violation. The fine was substantial. It went into the pile of fines that were accumulating in the human legal office at the conclave while the challenge remained under review. The pile was very large. That night, Yusuf went to his quarters and sat at his desk. He pulled up a document. It wasn't classified. It wasn't a military file. It had no official status at all. It had been started 40 years ago by a woman named Dara Ose. He knew this because the document had a creation date and an author field, and it had been added to, quietly, by every human official who had ever dealt with the conclave. The document was 4,000 pages long. It was an accounting, line by line, every stolen corridor, every delayed petition, every added form requirement, every interrupted presentation, every disease outbreak humanity had quietly helped contain in someone else's territory with no acknowledgement. Every fine paid for using lanes humanity had built, every colonial resource extracted by Dothrak ships, while conclave committees studied the situation. The accounting was precise. No emotion, no editorializing, just dates, amounts, species, and descriptions. On the cover page, in very small text, were 5 words. For when we're ready. Yusuf read for 3 hours. He had read this document before every senior human officer received access when they reached commander rank, but he read it again now. He always read it again after incidents. He thought about Lena, the auditor's hand, the way she had looked at the wall. He thought about the 9-year review. He thought about the Vreth, approved in 8 weeks. He closed the document and looked at the wall of his quarters for a while. It was a standard gray wall. Nothing interesting about it. He thought, 41 transits. 41 times I've crossed a lane my species built and paid a fee to a species that didn't build it. He thought, 9 years. He thought, 4,000 pages. He got up, made himself a cup of something hot, sat back down. He was not angry. This was the thing. He had expected to feel angry, reading the document, feeling the accumulation of it all. But anger was a flare. It burned bright, and then it needed more fuel. What Yusuf felt was not a flare. It was a slow, steady heat. Like an engine running at a temperature it had always been designed to reach. Like something coming online. He sent a message to his contact in the Human Sovereign Office. The message was short. It said, "How close are we to being ready?" The reply came back in 4 hours. It said, "Closer than they think." 3 weeks later, the Dothrak came to the Seth colony worlds. They came with mining ships, 12 of them, big as moons, slow as old gilt. The Seth colony worlds, 14 human settlements on the rim, rich in a mineral called velthite that was essential for jump drive manufacturing, had been human territory for 60 years. Technically, legally, their status was contested. It had been contested for 60 years. The conclave's position was that the territorial dispute required negotiation. The negotiation had been ongoing for 40 years. Progress had been made, in the sense that many meetings had occurred. The Dothrak did not wait for the meetings to conclude. They began extracting. It was, technically, legal, under a clause in Conclave Resource Code that allowed mining operations in contested territory if extraction was non-destructive, and a fee was paid into a general reparations fund. The Dothrak paid the fee. It was a small fee. The clause had been written 40 years ago, when the Dothrak were on the Resource Committee. The people living in the Seth colony worlds were not consulted. There were 200,000 of them. Farmers, mostly. Miners themselves, ironically. People who had built things on those worlds for 2 and 3 generations. Their great-grandparents were buried in soil that was now being stripped by machines the size of cities. Humanity sent an emergency petition to the conclave. The emergency petition was received. A committee was formed. The committee would convene within 30 days to discuss whether emergency status was appropriate. 30 days was not emergency speed. The Dothrak extracted velthite for 31 days, while the committee prepared to convene. The conclave committee convened. They discussed the situation for 2 days. They determined that the Dothrak operation, while troubling, was technically within the legal framework. They recommended that both parties pursue negotiation. They expressed hope that a peaceful resolution could be found. They fined the Dothrak. The fine was 4 million galactic credits. The velthite they had extracted in 31 days was worth 3 billion. Yusuf received the committee's decision on the bridge of the threshold. He read it twice. Then he put his datapad down on the console and stood very still for a moment, the way Dara Ose had stood against that corridor wall 40 years ago, that he had read about in her file. Preet was watching him. "Commander?" she said. He looked at her. Her face was controlled, but her jaw was set in a way that he recognized. The jaw of someone who is performing calm because it is necessary. He said, "Pull the ledger." She pulled it up on the main screen. 4,000 pages. The cover page. "For when we're ready. Add today," he said. She added it. Date. Dothrak extraction summary. Committee fine. Difference between fine and extracted value. 2,996,000,000 credits. The document was now 4,001 pages. "File it," he said. She filed it. They went back to work. That evening, Lena Vasquez came to Yusuf's office. She sat down across from him without being asked, which was her way. She was a small woman, short, dark-haired, with the kind of face that people underestimated. She had been a petty officer for 6 years and had turned down 2 promotions because she liked working with her hands and didn't trust herself not to break things if someone gave her too much authority. She said, "Commander, I want to ask you something." He said, "Go ahead." She said, "Do you ever think about why they think we'll just keep doing this?" He said, "Yes." She said, "What do you think the answer is?" He was quiet for a moment. He thought about 67 years of applications. He thought about the ledger. He thought about an auditor's hand on her arm. He said, "I think they looked at us, and they saw patience, and they mistook it for weakness." She nodded. She said, "Do you think they know the difference between patience and weakness?" He said, "Not yet." She said, "Okay." She stood up. "Good night, Commander." She left. He sat there for a while. He thought, "Not yet." He thought about what the word "yet" meant. It meant the thing had not happened. It also meant the thing was going to happen. He pulled up the message from the Human Sovereign Office. Closer than they think. He thought about Lena's face. Not angry. Not broken. Just waiting. The way a door waits. Just doing its job. Staying in place. Until someone turns the handle. He went to the porthole and looked out at the corridor. The beacons his species had built. Blinking. Steady. Reliable. Still there. Still doing their job. He thought. They looked at patience and called it weakness. They looked at stillness and called it submission. He thought. They never asked what we were building while we were being still. He turned off the light. Went to bed. Outside the porthole, the beacons blinked on, quiet and steady and patient, in the deep, cold dark. 144 of them, stretching across the corridor. Every single one built by human hands. The first sign was, the leave requests. They came in on a Tuesday, which was an ordinary day. No particular occasion, no galactic event, no crisis that anyone could see. 340 human ambassadors, across every station, embassy, and diplomatic post in conclave space, filed administrative leave requests on the same Tuesday. Simultaneously, not within the same hour, within the same 8-minute window, the conclave's administrative office processed them automatically at first. Leave requests were common. Diplomats burned out. Diplomats went home for festivals and births and deaths. The system stamped them and moved on. It was a junior clerk in the records division, a young Keth named Osith, 3 years out of training, still at the stage where everything felt significant, who noticed. She flagged it. Her supervisor told her it was a coincidence. She filed the flag anyway. Director General Amara Solano sat at a desk on Earth that was not impressive in any way that mattered. Small desk. A window with a view of a city that had been rebuilt twice in the last century and was, currently, in the middle of being rebuilt again. Not because of war. Just because humans kept deciding the old design was not good enough and they could do better. She had 3 screens, a cold cup of tea, and a stack of documents that had been growing for 6 months. The documents did not have dramatic titles. They had names like Infrastructure Transfer Protocol, Iridian Corridor, Relay Stations, Phase 1 through 7, and Colonial Resettlement Plan, Seth System Worlds, Voluntary and Gradual, and Maintenance, Handover Schedule, Jeth Corridor Navigation Beacons. She had been signing these documents, one by one, for 6 months. She signed another one now. set down her pen, drank the cold tea without noticing it was cold. Her deputy director, Kwame Asante, knocked on the open door. Phase 3 confirmations are in, he said. All 14 colony worlds. She nodded. Timeline? 8 months for the last families. Mostly voluntary. Some are there attached to the land. He paused. You know how people are. She knew. These were worlds where people had buried their grandparents, where children had grown up, thinking the red hills and the particular color of the sky was just what sky looked like. You couldn't tell people to leave a place like that and expect it to feel like nothing. Make sure the relocation support is full, she said. Nobody goes without what they need. Of course. And nobody goes knowing why yet. He nodded. This was the difficult part. The colonists were told it was voluntary resettlement, which was true. They were not told it was also strategic, which was also true. The ethics of this kept Amara up at some nights. Not enough to stop. Where are we on the corridor maintenance records? She asked. Formatted and filed, Kwame said. Correctly. In triplicate. Physical and digital. All paperwork is in order. He said this last part with a completely straight face. She almost smiled. Good, she said. Make sure everything is filed correctly. Every single document. I want them to have no procedural reason to reject any of it, because that was the thing about humanity's plan. The galaxy expected rage or aggression, or some grand dramatic announcement. They had spent 200 years watching humans submit politely to procedure. They did not know that humanity had spent 200 years learning procedure better than anyone. Every document in the withdrawal was filed correctly, on time, in the right format. Every requirement met. The Conclave's own rules were the tools. Humanity had just decided to start using them. The ambassadors did not make speeches when they left. They filed their leave requests. They finished their current work. They cleaned their offices. They left polite notes for their contacts. Several of them, the ones who had been in their posts for a long time, who had built real friendships with their alien counterparts, those ones had harder goodbyes. The human ambassador to the Keth homeworld, a woman named B. Torres, spent her last evening playing a strategy game with the deputy cultural minister, who had been her neighbor for 11 years. They played for 4 hours. Neither of them said anything about the fact that she was leaving in the morning. They just played the game. At the end, she won, which she had never done before. He told her she'd finally figured out his strategy. She said it had taken her a while. She didn't explain what she meant. He found out, later, that it had meant more than he thought. The relay stations went next. Not all at once, gradually. Over 3 months, human engineers who maintained the Iridian corridor relay stations submitted formal infrastructure transfer requests, fully documented, with complete maintenance histories, with handover guides written in 6 languages, with training modules for whoever took over. The Conclave processed the first transfer without concern. Station 7, Gamma was a small relay, low traffic, fine. The second and third were larger. By the 8th transfer request, someone in the Conclave Infrastructure Committee started asking questions. The question was, why? The Human Infrastructure Liaison Office replied promptly. The reason was regulatory. Under the terms of the original construction contracts which had been filed with the Conclave 40 years ago, and which no one had read in full, the maintenance obligations for human-built infrastructure were conditional on humanity's access to the transit lanes. Since the levy dispute had not been resolved and transit was now technically a violation, the conditional maintenance obligation was void. This was all correct. Legally, the Infrastructure Committee checked. It was correct. Legally, the 8th transfer was processed, then the 9th, then 10 through 20 in the same week, because the paperwork had been prepared well in advance. Someone in the Sketh Commerce Bureau called someone in the Human Infrastructure Liaison Office and asked, very carefully, whether this was a negotiating tactic. The human liaison said, it's a regulatory compliance measure. Ivry, the Sketh official said, yes, but is it? It's all correctly filed, the liaison said. Do you need the reference numbers? There was a long pause. No, the Sketh official said. Have a good day, the liaison said, and meant it. Velathos received the document on a Thursday. No sender, no subject line, just a file, delivered to his inbox at 0600 station time, sitting there between a committee agenda and a budget notification. He opened it. 4,001 pages. A human document. He recognized the format, the quiet, precise, dated accounting format that he had seen in fragments before, in various human filing, but never the whole thing. He began reading. He read for 6 hours. He didn't stop for meetings. He canceled 3 of them, which he had not done in 40 years. He read through lunch. He read through the afternoon session of the senior committee, which he missed for the first time in recorded history, and which caused his staff such significant distress that 2 of them came to his office door, and 1 of them knocked. He told them to go away. He kept reading. The document was not dramatic. That was what got him. He had expected something fierce, something with anger in it, something that shouted, but it didn't shout. It just recorded, date after date, line after line, the precise, patient accounting of 200 years of being dismissed, delayed, moved aside, ignored, and robbed. All of it wrapped in the correct forms, all of it filed properly, all of it unresolved and accumulating like interest in an account nobody had checked. He read the entry for the day Dara Ose had been interrupted for the 3rd time. He read the entry for the levy violations in the Iridian corridor. He read the entry for the Dothrak extraction at the Seth Colony Worlds. The fine, $4 million. The value taken, $3 billion. He read the entry for the Vreth membership approval. 8 weeks and 2 days. He did not know someone had written this down. He should have known. They wrote everything down. He reached page 4001, the last page, and he sat with what he found there. The final entry was from 6 months ago, and it was not another injury to record. It was a sentence. One sentence. Written by Director General Amara Solano. We have been ready for some time. We are beginning now. Velathos sat in his chair. He sat there for a long time. Then he sent a message to the Keth government. He marked it urgent. He had not marked anything urgent in 20 years. It said, "We made a mistake with the humans. Correct it now. Give them what they asked for 200 years ago. Do not wait. Do not file it for review. Do not table it. Do it now. You will not receive a second message from me on this subject." His government received the message. They formed a committee to review it. Amara Solano walked into the conclave chamber for the first time in 3 years. The chamber noticed. Humans had not attended conclave sessions in 3 years, not since the withdrawal of ambassadors. The gallery where human delegates used to sit had been empty so long that people had stopped looking at it. Its absence had become background. She was alone, no staff, no folder. She wore a plain gray jacket. She walked to the speaker's podium and she put both hands on it, and she looked out at the assembled delegates, and she waited until it was quiet. It became very quiet. She said, "I am here to file a notification." She placed a document on the podium, 11 pages, thin, unimpressive. She said, "The Human Sovereign Office is notifying the conclave, formally, that humanity has completed its review of 200 years of diplomatic engagement with this body. After careful consideration, she paused here, very briefly. On those 2 words, we have found the framework structurally ineffective. We are moving to a new framework." A Keth delegate said, "What framework?" She said, "You'll understand it contextually." She picked up the 11 pages and placed them in the official submission tray, which had a small plaque on it that said, "All submissions reviewed, within 60 days. The plaque had been there for 40 years. She turned and walked toward the door. Her chair scraped the floor as she pushed back from the podium. The scrape was not loud, but nothing else was making any sound. In a chamber designed to seat 400, with 311 delegates currently present, the scrape of one chair on a stone floor was the only sound in the room. Delegates looked at each other. Someone, later, would say it was the chair scraping that made it real. Not the words, not the document, the chair. A human sound. Ordinary. Final. The door closed. What followed was not war. Not at first. What followed was a silence. And in the silence, things became visible that had always been there but that no one had looked at carefully. The Iridian corridor. 17 relay stations were now under Sketh, administrative control. On paper. In practice, the Sketh engineers who arrived to take over found documentation written in a proprietary human technical language developed 40 years ago that they did not have translators for. The maintenance guides were complete, thorough, correct, in a format that required human interpretation software to read. The software was available. From the Human Sovereign Office. Request processing time. Under review. The Jeth Corridor. Navigation beacons. Also human-built. Also transferred correctly. Also documented in the same proprietary format. Ships started arriving late. Then later. The Jeth Corridor was a major trading artery. Late ships meant late cargo. Late cargo meant markets hiccuping. The Vreth, newly seated in the conclave, looked at the hiccuping markets and then looked at the empty human gallery, and then looked at the 11-page notification sitting in the submission tray. The Vreth cultural minister sent a private message to the Human Sovereign Office. The message said, "We were a small species once. We remember what it felt like to be ignored. What do you need from us?" Amara Solano replied personally. Her reply was short. "Nothing yet. But thank you for asking." She filed the exchange. Correctly. In triplicate. Velathos stood in the empty human embassy on the lower ring. The embassy had been cleaned before the humans left. Everything was in order. The furniture was aligned. The surfaces were clear. On the kitchen counter, human embassies always had kitchens, a fact he had always found endearing. There was a single cup. Clean. Upside down. Ready for use. Next to the cup was a note. He picked it up. It said, "In Keth. The coffee machine is in the third cabinet. The settings are labeled. Help yourself." It was signed by the last human liaison officer. Her name was printed, then her title, then a small line at the bottom that said, "Thank you for the conversations." Velathos stood in the empty kitchen for a long time. He thought, "We moved them like furniture, and they left us a note telling us where the coffee was." He thought, "I do not understand this species. After 200 years, I do not understand them at all," he thought. And that is the mistake. That is where it all went wrong. We thought patience was simple. We thought it meant they didn't mind. We never once asked what patience looks like when it runs out. He put the note in his pocket. He went back to his office. He had 52 messages waiting. He read the subject lines. 31 of them were about the corridors. 9 were from species asking if the humans could be reasoned with. 4 were from his government, asking him to clarify his urgent message. 8 were from junior diplomats, asking what to do. He replied to none of them. He sat at his desk and looked out the window at the corridor. The beacons blinked. All 144 of them. Still there. Still doing their job. Still human. He thought. What are they building while they are being still? He was about to find out. The fleet came out of jump at exactly 0600. Not 0559. Not 0601. Exactly 0600. Station time, which was a level of precision that should have been impossible. Jump drives were not surgical instruments. The physics of folded space made exact arrival times into a matter of educated probability. You aimed for a window, and you hit the window, and you called that good enough. The human fleet hit 0600 on the mark, all 4,000 ships. The Dothrak sensor network registered it across 17 different monitoring stations simultaneously. The alerts came in not as staggered signals from different distances, but as one pulse, one moment, as if every ship had appeared at exactly the same distance from every sensor at once. This was not possible. The Dothrak Tactical Command began scrambling before they had finished processing what they were seeing. Admiral Lena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Meridian, her flagship, named for a word that meant the highest point of something, and she looked at the Dothrak ships on the sensor display and she said nothing. She was a small woman. Her bridge crew was professional and well-trained, and in this moment, they were all performing calm, with the focus of people who had practiced performing calm in simulators for years, and were now using every bit of that practice. She let them perform it. She watched the display. The Dothrak fleet mobilized fast. She had expected this. The Dothrak military was large, twice humanity's fleet size. On paper, they believed in overwhelming force, in the comfort of big numbers. They had 1,200 warships moving toward her position within 4 minutes of detection. She waited. They came in hard, weapons hot, broadcasting on all channels that the human fleet was in violation of Dothrak territorial space and was to stand down immediately. The human fleet did not stand down. It also did not fire. It did something that no military fleet in galactic history had done in the face of an incoming charge. It opened a communications channel. The communication that Lena Vasquez sent to the Dothrak fleet commander was 3 sentences long. We are here. We are aware of your fleet size. We ask that you observe what happens next before making any decisions. The Dothrak commander, a large, gray-armored officer named Vrak Deshu, who had won 4 major engagements in his career, and had been told, privately, that no species in the quadrant had a weapon platform that could seriously threaten his fleet, replied, with a 5th charge order. The charge reached Lena's forward ships. What happened next was this. The Dothrak weapons fired. The human shields absorbed the impact completely and without visible effect, which was surprising. Then the human weapons fired. A pulse, 1 wave, not explosions, not beam weapons, something that looked, on the Dothrak sensor readout, like nothing more than a quiet ripple. Every Dothrak ship in the forward formation stopped. Not destroyed, not on fire, not venting atmosphere. Stopped. Engines dead. Weapons offline. Life support and basic systems intact. 300 ships, hanging in space like stones dropped in deep water. The crews inside them were unharmed. Confused, but unharmed. Vrak Deshu stared at his sensor display for a long time. He had not known this weapon existed. No one had known, because humanity had not built it in the last 3 years. They had not built it in the last decade. The earliest reference to the research that produced it was in a paper published in a small human scientific journal 41 years ago. No one in the conclave had read the paper. No one had thought to. It was a human paper, from a human journal, about human physics. Humanity had been developing it quietly, in labs on colony worlds, in university programs, in the margins of other work, for 4 decades, while filing forms, while submitting petitions, while thanking committees for their time. Lena Vasquez sent a second communication to Vrak Deshu. It said, "We can disable your remaining fleet the same way. We are choosing not to. We would like to talk." Vrak Deshu talked. The conversation that followed was not broadcast, not recorded for public consumption. It was private, and Lena Vasquez had insisted on this, because she was not interested in humiliating anyone. She was interested in being clear. She told Vrak Deshu that the 14 Seth colony worlds were human territory, not contested, not under review. Human. The colonists who had been displaced by 31 days of Dothrak mining were going to receive full restitution. The Velthite that had been extracted was going to be returned, or its value paid, within 90 days. Vrak Deshu asked by what authority she was making these demands. She said, "Our own." He said, "The conclave." She said, "The conclave's review of this matter is ongoing. We've decided not to wait." He said, "This is an act of war." She said, "No. An act of war is what your fleet did to civilian colonists on worlds they'd lived on for generations. This is a correction." The word hung in the communication channel between them. Correction. Vrak Deshu was a military man. He understood force. He understood the language of it, the grammar of it. He understood that the 300 ships hanging dead in space behind him were a sentence, and that the sentence had not ended. There were still 3,700 human ships out there, and he had just watched his forward formation disabled in a single pulse. He was calculating. She could see it in the silence. 90 days, he said finally. 90 days, she agreed. And the ships? She reactivated his 300 ships. Not slowly. Not with conditions. Just on. Engines back. Weapon systems locked. But life support, navigation, communications, all restored. He hadn't expected that. She saw it in the pause before he responded. She had expected the pause, because this was the part the galaxy never understood about humans, the capacity to be powerful and also give something back in the same breath. Not because it was strategically optimal, because it was the right thing to do. Vrak Deshu said, "I will communicate your terms to the Dothrak government." She said, "Take your time, within reason." He ended the call. She turned to her bridge crew. They were all watching her. She said, "Log it as routine." Someone at the back of the bridge almost laughed, caught themselves, and coughed instead. The economic effects began the same day. Not because anyone planned them to happen simultaneously with the fleet action they had been in motion for months, but the withdrawal of human technical cooperation from the conclave's trade infrastructure was a slow process, like water draining from a bowl. And the day of the fleet action was the day the bowl became visibly empty. The Iridian corridor went to half capacity. The Sketh had been managing the transferred relay stations for 3 months, and they had been managing them badly, because the documentation was in a proprietary format they still hadn't cracked, and the software to read it was still under review at the Human Sovereign Office. The stations that the Sketh engineers could manage were being managed. The rest were dark. Half capacity meant ships waited. Ships waiting meant cargo didn't arrive. Cargo not arriving meant markets. Markets meant money. Money meant political pressure from the species whose economies ran on that trade artery. Delegate Korath of the Sketh Commerce Bureau had not slept properly in 3 weeks. He put in a formal request to the Human Sovereign Office for access to the proprietary documentation format. The Human Sovereign Office replied promptly. The request was received. It was under review. Processing time, standard. Standard processing time was 60 days. Korath sent another request. More urgent. The response. The first request was still processing. Filing a second request while a first was active created a procedural conflict that required resolution before either could proceed. They thanked him for his patience. He stared at his screen for a long time. He had written the clause about levy fees in the Conclave Maritime Code, the one that had been generating corridor violations against human ships for 9 years. He had written it carefully. He had been proud of how cleanly it was worded. He understood, sitting at his desk, that he was now on the other side of cleanly worded clauses. It was not a comfortable place to be. The Vreth made their move quietly. They announced, in a brief statement to the Conclave, that they were opening full diplomatic and trade relations with the Human Sovereign Office. They were withdrawing from 3 Conclave economic agreements that conflicted with their new arrangements. The Conclave was furious. A senior delegate from the Vrathine, the census species, meticulous and proud, called the Vreth cultural minister directly and expressed strong disapproval. The Vreth cultural minister said, "We remember when we were Category 3. The Vrathine delegate said, "That is not relevant." The Vreth minister said, "It is to us." He ended the call. The moment that changed everything, not the fleet, not the economics, but the real change, the one that went into every history book that would be written afterward, happened in a conference room on the conclave sphere. Small room, not a chamber, not a formal space. A working room, with a long table and uncomfortable chairs and a window that looked out at the docking ring. Velathos had requested the meeting. Amara Solano had agreed to it. She came alone, which surprised him. He had expected lawyers, advisors, a delegation of some kind. She sat across from him with a glass of water and waited. He was old. She was middle-aged. Between them was the weight of 200 years of a relationship that had been, from his side, largely administrative. He was aware of this now in a way he had not been before reading the ledger. He said, "What do you want?" She said, "What we always wanted, what we asked for 200 years ago." He said, "A seat at the table." She said, "Not anymore." The window behind her showed the docking ring. Ships coming and going, commerce and movement and the ordinary machinery of a galaxy that was very quietly seizing up because 40 years of human-built infrastructure had just withdrawn its cooperation. He said, "What then?" She folded her hands on the table. She said, "We want to build the next table. If the current members would like seats at it, they can ask us." 2000 forehand. He was quiet. He said, "You planned this." She said, "We filed it. First petition. 2157, paragraph 9. The clause about alternative frameworks if standard diplomatic processes proved structurally ineffective." She paused. It was under review. He looked at her. She looked back. He said, "You are angry." She considered this carefully. She said, "We were, for a long time. I think somewhere around year 80, we moved past anger into something else." He said, "What?" She said, "Clarity." He thought about the 4,000-page ledger. The precision of it. No anger in the writing. Just dates and numbers and facts, accumulating like the records of an engineer who builds something for a long time before anyone notices the blueprint was there all along. He said, "The weapon. The pulse. How long have you had it?" She said, 41 years. He said, "You built it while," she said, "while filing forms." "Yes." "A silence." He said, "Why didn't you use it sooner?" She said, "We didn't need to. We were hoping we wouldn't have to." He looked out the window. Ships coming and going. The ordinary machinery of a galaxy. He said, "What do you need from me?" she said. "Your honest answer to one question." He said. "Ask it," she said. "If we had been the Vreth, if we had arrived with the right gifts, the right connections, the right species in our corner, would you have approved us in 8 weeks?" He did not answer immediately. He sat with the question. He sat with the memory of Dara Ose in a corridor. He sat with the ledger. He sat with 43 denials and the 44 years since he had met the first human ambassador, and written in his log, "They try so hard. It is almost moving." He said, "Yes." She nodded. She said, "Thank you for saying that." She stood, offered her hand. Humans did this. He knew the gesture. He took her hand. She left. He sat for a moment. He thought, 200 years. And all it would have cost us was a seat. He thought, what did we think we were protecting? He looked at the window, ships coming and going. The ones in the Iridian corridor were backed up. He could see the holding pattern from here. Ships waiting. He had made them wait a long time. He began drafting a proposal. Not a review. Not a committee recommendation. A proposal. For the first time in his career, he marked it. Immediate action required. The new conclave had 23 seats. This was not a small change. The old one had 13, or rather, it had been designed for 13, seated 11, and had kept one chair permanently empty through bureaucratic indecision for 40 years. The new one had 23 seats, and every seat was filled, and the table was round. The round table was humanity's idea. No head of table, no senior end, no arrangement by species, age, or military strength, or accumulated wealth. Just a circle, and 23 seats around it, and a rule written into the founding charter that no delegation could interrupt another delegation's address. The rule had a name. It was called the Ose Provision, named, at humanity's insistence, for the woman who had been interrupted 3 times. Her granddaughter attended the inaugural session. She sat in the observer gallery. She was a doctor, not a diplomat. She wore a pin on her lapel, a yellow star on a green field, and she watched the first session and cried quietly in a way she would later describe to the journalist who asked, as not sadness, just something finally arriving that took too long to get here. Velathos wrote his memoirs in his final year. He was the oldest living Keth. He was also, by most measures, the oldest living diplomat of any species. He had processed applications, reviewed committees, voted on 700 resolutions, and attended more sessions of the conclave than any other being in recorded history. He wrote everything down. He wrote about the 43 species he had denied. He wrote about why he had denied them, some for good reasons, some for political reasons, some for reasons he was honest enough, at his age, to call lazy reasons. He wrote about the 47th species. He wrote about a woman in a dark blue suit. He wrote, "She mispronounced our language the way someone mispronounces a word they have only read and never heard." That detail has stayed with me for longer than almost anything else in 200 years of this work, because what it meant was that she studied, on her own, in a room, with a book, without a teacher who could correct her. She got it almost right. Almost right is what you get when you are trying hard and no one is helping you. I did not help her. None of us did. This is the thing I will not forgive myself for. And I am old enough to know that not forgiving yourself for something is only useful if you understand clearly what you did. We saw a species that smiled and said thank you, and resubmitted their forms, and we called that small. We thought, they accept this. We thought, they will keep accepting it. We did not ask. What does a species that accepts everything for 200 years actually look like when it stops accepting? We found out. He paused in his writing, looked out his window. The new conclave sphere was visible from his home. It was larger than the old one. Humanity had designed the expansion, built it in 3 years, with a speed that still quietly astonished him, completed it on schedule and under budget and without making any particular announcement. They had just done it, the way they did everything. Quietly, thoroughly, without waiting for someone to tell them they could. He picked up his pen and kept writing. The Dothrak Tribunal took 18 months. Humanity had proposed it, funded the initial framework, written the structural guidelines, and then stepped back from the bench entirely. The tribunal was run by 3 judges, 1 Vreth, 1 Keth, and 1 Jetharai, the last being a small, quiet species that had been in the conclave for 60 years. and had never been asked to do anything important before. The Jetheri judge, later in an interview, said that being asked to sit on the tribunal was the first time her species had felt like a real member of the galactic community. The journalist asked why. She said, "Because we were asked. Not just included. Asked." The Dothrak leadership was tried on 11 counts. 3 leaders were removed from power. Restitution payments were ordered. The 14 Seth colony worlds were formally recognized as human territory in a legal document that used the word irrevocably 7 times, which everyone felt was probably enough. Admiral Lena Vasquez attended the final day of the tribunal proceedings. She sat in the observer section, in civilian clothes, and watched without expression. When the final verdict was read, someone next to her, a young aide, who had not known who she was, whispered that it was a good outcome. She said, "It's a start." He asked what came next. She thought for a moment. She said, "We make sure it doesn't have to happen again." He asked how. She said, "Same way we do everything, carefully, with the paperwork in order." He laughed, not knowing if she was joking. She was not joking. The Sketh corridor fees were paid retroactively, 67 years of them, calculated precisely, with interest, based on the same formula the Sketh Commerce Bureau had used to calculate human levy violations. The same formula, applied the same way. The total was large enough that the Sketh Finance Ministry had to restructure 3 budget lines to accommodate it. Delegate Korath, who was now retired and who spent his mornings in a garden and his evenings trying not to think about spreadsheets, heard the number when it was announced and sat down on a bench in his garden and stayed there for an hour. He thought about the clause he had written, the clean wording, the procedural elegance. He thought about the fact that humanity had documented every single transit, every single fee, every single day for 67 years, and had said nothing until they were ready. He thought, they were building a case, the whole time, every day, patiently building a case. He thought, we gave them 67 years of evidence. He went inside, made tea, drank it, did not sleep well. The restitution funds from the corridor fees went into a colonial development account for the smaller species on the outer rim, the ones who'd never had anyone advocating for them, the Category 3S, the ones whose applications were in filing cabinets somewhere, under review. The account was administered by a committee that included 2 human representatives, 2 Vreth, 2 Jethari, and 1 member elected by the recipient species themselves. No Sketh, no Dothrak, no Keth. Not as punishment, just as a design decision. The people who had spent the most time being ignored, humanity had decided, were the most qualified to decide who needed help. Velathos, reading this in the morning news, wrote in his private notes, "Of course they did it that way. Of course." Small species began sending messages to the Human Sovereign Office. Dozens of them at first, then more. Species that the Conclave had classified as Category 3 or Category 4. Too small, too remote, too something who had watched what happened and were trying to understand it, not to replicate it. They didn't have humanity's resources or its long game or its 40 years of secret weapons research. They just wanted to understand. The question they asked, in different languages and different phrasings, all came down to the same thing. How did you wait so long without breaking? The Human Sovereign Office assigned a diplomat named Cato Ferreira to answer these messages. He was a young man, 31, from a colony world on the rim. He had grown up on one of the worlds adjacent to the Seth system. His parents had stayed through the Dothrak extraction, and he had grown up with the sound of those machines in the distance, and with the particular quality of silence his parents kept when the subject came up. He answered every message personally. He wrote long letters, because he felt the question deserved long answers. And he was the kind of person who believed that small species who had never been written to deserve the same quality of reply as large ones. His answers were different for every species, because their situations were different. But there was something consistent in all of them. He never said, be patient. He said, build. He said, document. He said, know your own value, better than anyone else knows it. He said, file everything correctly, because someday the rules will be tools, and you will want to know how to use them. He said, don't wait for someone to tell you that you matter. You already know. Write it down. One of the species he wrote to was the Tashari small, 4-eyed, from a cold world in the far rim, who had been applying for conclave membership for 30 years. They wrote back to say that his letter had been read aloud at a government session and that 3 of the delegates had cried. He wrote back to say that was completely understandable. He also quietly flagged their application to the new conclave membership committee, which had a processing target of 8 weeks. The Teshari were approved in 6. Velathos reached the last section of his memoirs. He had been writing for 4 months. His eyesight was not what it had been. He used a voice recorder some days and transcribed it himself on the days he felt good. Today was a good day. He sat at his desk. He had the 4,000-page document open on his screen. He had read it 11 times now. He knew it like he knew his own files, maybe better, because he had read it with attention that guilt lends to things. He had reached the part where he had to write about the last page. The last page of the ledger was not another entry. It was a document within the document, older than the rest, written in a slightly different style, scanned in from what looked like handwritten pages. The scan was slightly crooked, as if someone had laid the pages on a scanner quickly, without much fuss. It was Dara Ose's personal journal entry, the night she came home from her 3rd interrupted address, the night that became the first entry in the ledger, 67 years before what the galaxy now called the correction. He read it again. She wrote about the session, about Delegate Korath and the question about Form 7, Gamma, about standing at the podium the 3rd time and beginning her sentence, and being interrupted before she finished it. She wrote about thanking the conclave for their time. She wrote, I stood in the corridor afterward and I looked at the wall and I thought, we are going to have to do something different. Not now. We're not ready yet. But someday. I told the old Keth delegate that we were used to it. That was true. What I didn't say was that being used to something doesn't mean you accept it. It just means you've been practicing. Practicing for what? That's the question. I think I know the answer, but I won't write it yet, because it's a big answer, and big answers need time to be right. Someday someone will ask us how we were so patient, and we'll tell them the truth. We were never patient. We were just busy. Velathos read that last line for the 11th time. He sat with it. He had been a diplomat for 220 years. He had processed applications and voted on resolutions and written reports, and attended sessions, and done the work of keeping the galaxy's systems running. He had done it correctly, efficiently, professionally. He had not been cruel. He had not been unusual. He had been exactly what the system asked him to be. That was the thing. He had been exactly what the system asked him to be. And the system had asked him to look at a species that smiled and resubmitted and thanked committees for their time, and to see something small, something manageable, something that would keep. The system had been wrong. He had been wrong. He began to write. He wrote, the question historians will ask is whether any one decision could have changed what happened. I believe the answer is yes. I believe the moment was the first vote, 67 years before the correction. If we had approved them then, if I had moved my 2 junior delegates, if I had voted differently, the ledger would not exist. The pulse weapon might still exist, humanity being humanity, but it would not have been used. The corridors would not have gone dark. The colonies would not have been evacuated. The tribunal might never have been needed. None of it was necessary. All of it was chosen. That is what I will carry. Not the grand shape of it, not the history. The small thing, a chair scraping a floor, a woman in a corridor saying, we're used to it. The cup she left behind in the embassy kitchen with a note telling us where the coffee was. The quality of care in that gesture. The particular humanity of it. Leaving something useful for the people who had not, in 200 years, left anything useful for them. This is what I did not understand about them. They were kind not because the galaxy deserved their kindness. They were kind because it was the kind of species they had decided to be. That decision survived 200 years of our worst. And when it finally ran out, when the patience ran out, when the kindness stopped being extended forward and started being redirected inward, they did not become cruel. They became clear. There is a difference. I understand the difference now. I wish I had understood it sooner. I am writing this for the Keth who comes after me. I am writing it for every senior diplomat who will read this and think they understand small species, peripheral species, species that smile and say, thank you, and mean it. Read the ledger. They kept a ledger. The whole time, every species you have dismissed, delayed, or moved aside like furniture is keeping a ledger. The question is what it says. The question is how long you have left before it's finished. He stopped writing. The window showed the new conclave sphere, lit up in the morning, ships docking and departing in the ordinary rhythm of a galaxy that was, slowly, carefully, working at being better at this. On the far side of the sphere, he knew, was the memorial that humanity had proposed and designed and quietly built into the structure of the expansion. Not a statue, not a plaque for great leaders. A room, a small room off the main corridor, with 23 chairs arranged in a circle, a smaller version of the chamber, and on the wall, in every language the conclave recognized, one sentence. The first petition was filed in good faith. All that followed was earned. Below that, in letters small enough that you had to step close to read them, in memory of Dara Ose and the 43 ambassadors who came after her, who asked politely, until asking politely stopped being enough. Velathos had visited the room once. He had stood in it alone, with the 23 chairs around him, and he had read the wall, and he had felt not for the first time, but more clearly than ever before, the full size of what a small decision costs. Not a dramatic decision, not a vote for war, or a declaration of something. Just a vote. 9 against. 2 abstain. 0 in favor. The most ordinary thing in the world. He had stayed in the room for a long time. Then he had gone back to his desk. And he had kept writing, because there was more to say, and he was old, and he did not want to waste what time he had. He saved the document. He closed his screens. He made himself a cup of something, not coffee. He had never been able to manage human coffee, and he sat at his window and he watched the ships coming and going from the new conclave sphere, and he thought about all the things that were different now, and all the things that had not changed at all, and the very specific things that had changed just enough. He thought about patience. He thought, it is not a soft thing. It is not weakness wearing a gentle face. It is the hardest substance in the known galaxy, harder than anything the Dothrak mines, harder than the material they carved my chair from. Patience held at full pressure for 200 years is something that, when it finally moves, reshapes everything it touches. We never respected it. We never even saw it. We thought they were waiting because they had no choice. They were waiting because they were choosing to. There is a difference. There is always a difference. The tragedy is how long it takes some of us to learn it. Outside his window, the ships moved. The new sphere gleamed in the light of the star it orbited. The Teshari delegation was arriving today. 6-week approval. New members. First session. He had read their application. Thorough. Correct. Filed in the right format. He thought, we owe them a better welcome than we gave the last species who filed that well. He thought, we owe a great many species a better welcome. He put down his cup. He picked up his pen. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. That, at least, had not changed. The ship was embarrassing.